Good afternoon, everybody. This is Sean Heath, Director of Housing for the City of Charlotte. Glad we're able to join you today. Let's do quick introductions on the city side, and then I will jump into some slide content, and then we'll finish up with an opportunity for Q&A. So let's go ahead and do quick introductions. Jackie, we'll start with you.
All right, thank you, Sean. I'm Jackie Clare, and I work in the Community Engagement Division of Housing and Neighborhood Services, and I am the Community Grants Manager. I think, Mike, I'll toss it over to you.
Not sure if we have Mike yet. We can go to Pat.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, there you are, Mike.
All right, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Yes, Mike Curtis. I'm the Business Support Division Manager in Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Thanks, Mike. Pat?
Good afternoon. I'm Patricia Mason. I work in Housing and Neighborhood Services Business Support. I'm the Risk and Compliance Manager.
And hi, everyone. I'm Gail Whitcomb, also with Housing and Neighborhood Services, and I am the point of contact for the nonprofit housing support grant that you are interested in. So during the application process, you will be able to reach out to me with any questions that you have. My contact information will be later in the presentation, and it's also on the website.
And it's good to see everyone. My name is Warren Wooten. I'm the Assistant Director for Affordable Housing for Housing and Neighborhood Services, and I'm going to help out with any housing program related questions at the end of the presentation. It's good to see everyone.
Thank you, Warren. Hey, Jackie, can I put you on the spot and let you give it a try on the share screen to see if it works better on your side? And if not, we'll go with mine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. As Jackie's doing that, I neglected to mention that we're recording this session, so it can be available to others that may have not been able to join today. That looks great on my screen, Jackie. Thanks a bunch.
All right, so now I've got to figure out how to drive it, though. I don't know where the buttons are. There it is. Okay.
All right, great. Fantastic. So once again, Sean Heath, Housing Department. We'll try to move through the slides relatively quickly because most everything that we've packaged here in the presentation is consistent with, if not identical, with the notice of funding opportunity that was already released and you have at your disposal. But we thought it would be helpful to provide a little bit of color commentary from the city's perspective. So on May 22nd, I did a presentation to City Council and presented on a number of topics, one of which was the concept that we would use a proposal really that we would use some of our federal stimulus funds, here on this slide referred to as ARPA or ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan. And the proposal I presented to council a month ago was that we would set aside $6.5 million of our federal stimulus funds and focus it on what we're now calling the Housing Support Grant Program Opportunity Today. And I think the proposal was very well received by council. They're intrigued by the idea, supportive, and want us to move forward in an accelerated fashion. So we worked very quickly after that May 22nd meeting to stand up the request for proposal, get that out, have the last week, have the informational session today, and then have about a 1 month period of time from the date the notice of funding opportunity was released in order for eligible nonprofit organizations to submit their proposals. So I'm pleased how quickly this has fallen into place over the last couple of weeks. In terms of the purpose of the program, we wanted to do something very different with this funding opportunity. And because if you think about historically, what we generally do with our housing and homelessness related funding opportunities is, generally speaking, it's going to be either large nonprofit organizations and or for-profit developers that we're partnering with. And those entities have been great partners and they will continue to be great partners. But we also know at the same time in parallel, I know I've received a lot of feedback over the last 12 to 18 months. What are the types of things the city of Charlotte can do to better demonstrate a connection to kind of small, medium-sized, emerging nonprofits in the community that are really doing good work around housing and homelessness issues but may not always be able to compete against those really large, well-funded, well-established nonprofits and for-profit developers. So having a chance to talk to a number of those entities as I've kind of stepped into this role over the last year, having a chance to see some of the programming in action, I was really passionate about us trying to find a way to develop something that's really targeted towards that small and medium-sized nonprofit community. So that's really what this is intended to do. And you can see here the purpose of the program. By design, this is fairly broad. So focused on either projects or programmatic support, medium-sized emerging nonprofits, and there'll be subsequent slides that get into a little more specific information on that, to advance housing solutions for individuals or families that are either homeless or at risk of homelessness. And there is also direct reference on here on projects or programming that are focused on communities or individuals and households that have faced a disproportionate or disparate impact of COVID-19. I don't think that will be that hard to demonstrate, but it's a necessary feature because it links directly back to the federal funding source here, the American Rescue Plan. And that was really the intent of the funding that was released by the federal government to cities and counties all across the country. Moving on to number 3 here, whereas the overall program is envisioned as $6.5 million, the maximum award per entity request would be capped at $2.5 million. And you can see the last bullet point here that we would expect to award a small number of grants under this program. You may wonder, well, what is a small number? So I would venture to say that having not received any of the applications yet, or at least not reviewed any of the applications, I don't know exactly what the number will be, but I believe somewhere in the range of 3 to 5. So we want the individual grants to be meaningful. We know there's a trade-off. You know, one philosophy or one approach with this sort of thing is to take $6.5 million and spread it across the most number of nonprofits that you could possibly do. We're electing not to do that with this particular program. So it will be a relatively small number of awards that are made. And I would just underscore that as a result, that means that being an eligible organization for the program does not translate to any guarantee that any funding will be received under the program itself. Next slide, please. In terms of the eligibility of the organizations themselves, this is focused on registered 501c3 organizations that have a current 990 filing with the IRS. The requesting organization must have at least one full-time staff person and an operating board of directors. The nonprofit needs to have been founded and formally established at least 2 years ago. In terms of the financial size that we're looking at, there's a minimum requirement that the nonprofit have an operating budget of at least $250,000. And there's kind of a maximum threshold that annual operating revenue be less than $7.5 million in the most recent fiscal year. And maybe I should have put "or" in bold on this particular slide. So there are 2 ways to be eligible as it relates to size or age of the nonprofit. It's either to fall within that $250,000 to $7.5 million range, or if it's a nonprofit that was founded between 2 to 10 years ago. So just to give you a specific example, let's say there's someone on the call that had annual revenue of $8 million in the most recent fiscal year. Well, if they were founded between 2 to 10 years ago, they could still apply for this particular award. So you really need to think of those as kind of an either or kind of a scenario. And once again, back to the federal requirements associated with the use of American Rescue Plan funding, it's necessary that the organization be able to demonstrate in its application how the program or project would be connected to communities that have borne into a disparate impact related to COVID-19. Next slide, please. In terms of the nature of the projects that would be eligible under the program, once again, by design, this is intended to be very broad. It's intended to be very inclusive. It's intended to really pull in a lot of things that we're already currently funding with some of the larger nonprofits and/or for-profit developers here across different funding opportunities. With this one, we're trying to bundle it all under one umbrella and say, if you're an eligible organization and you've got an affordable multifamily rental housing project, great. Or if you've got affordable home ownership, great, that would be eligible. Supportive housing would also be something that could be pursued. Temporary emergency housing or non-congregate shelter scenarios, also eligible use of funds. And then finally, supportive services, which could be tethered to one of the items above as applicable or pursued on a standalone basis. Once again, maximum amount of the request is $2.5 million. And then just to draw a finer point on this last thing here, this is really intended to be tethered to a specific project or program. It's not designed to be general operating support. Separate and distinct from the program we're talking about today, last month we launched also an ARPA funded program that we're referring to as the Community Resiliency Fund or the Community Resiliency Grant Program. It's very different than this one in a number of ways. I'll just make two particular distinctions. One is that separate program is designed just for operating support. And two, the maximum award under that program is $250,000. So it's very separate from this one. You might be wondering, if you are eligible for this program and the other program, could you apply to both? Yes, you could, so long as you meet the deadlines. So for the program that we're discussing today, the deadline is in mid-July. For the Community Resilience Grant Program on operating support for eligible organizations, the deadline for requesting that funding is June 30th. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through these next few slides fairly quickly. This just takes the eligible uses on the prior slide and teases out a little information. As I had said before, this information is identical with what was provided in the Notice of Funding Opportunity when it was released. In terms of multifamily rental housing, it can be either new construction or it can be naturally occurrable, affordable housing for rental purposes. Consistent with what we historically do with our Housing Trust Fund requests for proposals, there are a few baseline requirements that we have in place for multifamily rental housing, one of which is that it needs to focus on households that are at 80% or below an area median income. There also needs to be a certain percentage, it's 20% to be specific, of the units need to be devoted to households that are at 30% AMI or below. And then we also have a minimum affordability requirement for the multifamily rental of 20 years. Lately, for new construction, we're generally seeing proposals that are at least 30 years, if not 40. And for naturally occurable affordable housing, 20 years has been the norm of what we've seen recently. Next slide, please. Affordable home ownership. So here we're thinking of scenarios where it's new construction, single family detached or townhome styled housing. Here, once again, we have an AMI requirement where the housing would need to be focused on households at 80% AMI or below. For home ownership, there's no requirement that gets down into the 30% AMI level for obvious reasons there. Minimum affordability period on home ownership scenarios for us is 15 years. And then last here, there are different home ownership models, not just in Charlotte, but across the country. And we do have a requirement for this particular grant program that if there is a home ownership request that's being made, that the nonprofit be able to demonstrate that there's either a shared equity or shared appreciation component to it for the homeowner, or that it's being done under a community land trust model, which provides 99-year affordability or even permanent affordability, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. Supportive housing development. So here we'd be focused specifically on special needs housing, such as the elderly or the homeless population. And we have also put in a specific requirement here that the nonprofit must either have or commit to submit an application for financing from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency for their supportive housing development program. Next slide, please. On temporary emergency housing or non-congregate shelter, once again, trying to be broad and inclusive. This could be via a lease or an acquisition and rehab or a new construction scenario. And the units would need to be focused on families that are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Next slide, please. Supportive services, as I mentioned before, these could either be tethered to one of the eligible uses mentioned previously and or on a standalone basis. And I've given some examples here on the slide. Next slide, please. On additional considerations here, the core point is, as I mentioned before, our funding source for this is the American Rescue Plan from the U.S. Treasury Department. So this would be federal funds. And there are some requirements, as many of you or all of you would know, associated with federal funds. I'm going to leave it at that for now because there are a few slides closer to the end of the presentation that Jackie's going to make a few finer points on this particular topic. Next slide, please. So this is a very important slide. And once again, this is identical with the information that was released when we announced the funding opportunity. So these are not eligibility requirements, but these are attributes that we will be looking for in the proposals. And the more attributes a proposal has, the stronger the proposal will be. So theoretically, a proposal could have none of these and they could still pursue funding. Theoretically, a proposal could have all 6 of these and could still pursue funding. And as I mentioned before, because it's a finite resource and we'll have a relatively small number of awards that are made, theoretically, a request could include all 6 of these attributes and not get funded. So I want to make sure that we're putting appropriate context around this. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is demonstrate these are specific attributes that the city of Charlotte is very interested in terms of the value proposition for a particular proposal. So bottom line here, the more of these that you can check the box on, the better. First would be a track record, that the requesting organization has a track record of delivering programming in marginalized or underserved communities. Second, and this kind of goes hand in hand with number 1 to a degree, that the underlying project or programming request focuses on corridors of opportunity, areas of influence. One of the subsequent slides will show you a visual. I'm sure many or all of you are familiar with our 6 corridors of opportunity. The quote unquote area of influence is a slightly larger geographic boundary associated with, because the 6 corridors themselves are fairly narrow. So the areas of influence essentially just extend those boundaries out a bit. So we'll have a visual of that in a second. On number 3 here, one area where I frequently receive questions from City Council when I'm making presentations is, what are some specific things that we're doing as it pertains to our housing and homelessness work to really focus on very hard to house populations, including justice involved residents, homeless families, and voucher holders. You know, we know how challenging it can be for housing choice voucher or other types of rental subsidy holders to get access to housing. So that's something that we're certainly interested in, is really kind of the target population associated with the project or program that you're bringing forward. Number 4, you know, this of course will depend on the specifics of the project or program, but I would say it's fair to say that all else equal, the city likes to see other funders involved in initiatives. So there's an element of leverage associated with our funding, and you know, we're putting money in collaboration with other private or public sector funding sources is something that's of interest to us. Number 5, because this is one-time funding, and I would say it's certainly my hope that we'll be able to find creative ways in the future to do things like this, even though we won't have the COVID-related federal funding at our disposal anymore. You know, the fact is that this is one-time funding that we're relying on from the federal government. So one of the things that we're interested in the project applications is a demonstration by the applicant that they have a credible plan to sustain the project or program beyond the use of the city's funds. You know, to the extent there's a cliff effect where our funding goes away, how is the applicant thinking about the future in order to sustain whatever it is that hopefully our funding will help be a catalyst to put in place. And then the last thing, and you know, each one of these is important, so I'm not going to pick any favorites, but this one is last, but certainly not least, which would be any ability of the applicant to demonstrate an existing level of community support for the project or program that you're bringing forward. I think it's always helpful for us to know that you know, the community being served, kind of literally and figuratively, is not just aware of, but supportive of what you may be bringing forward as a project opportunity. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, with our 6 corridors of opportunity, which are named here on the left side of the slide, you can see the purpose of the visual is to show you with some color coding when we refer to quote unquote corridors of opportunity, areas of influence, how it's a much expanded footprint relative to the corridor itself. So once again, it's not a requirement that the programming be here, but as mentioned on the previous slide, it's a preference because the vision with corridors of opportunities is for the city to continue to be very intentional about harnessing investments in underserved communities, underinvested communities that are facing a whole range of challenges related to, crime and lack of employment opportunities and lack of educational attainment. So, there's not one, single thing necessarily that the city can do to address all of these challenges. But with corridors of opportunity, I think it's intended to be a recognition that if our housing work and our jobs and workforce development and economic development work and our infrastructure work with CDOT, for example, are all being as intentional as possible about a strategic focus on these areas, that over time, and this is obviously a kind of a multi-year kind of a thing, we can start to really move the needle in a meaningful way in these particular communities. Next slide. In terms of the timelines, as I mentioned before, mid-July is the deadline for submitting applications. To be specific, July 14th at 5 p.m. That'll be a firm deadline, so there won't be any extensions beyond that date. Then we'll enter into an application review period where I will assemble a cross-department review team to evaluate and score the proposals. And then my target is to provide a briefing on the recommended funding awards to City Council on August 28th. As you're aware, City Council has a summer schedule, so they meet less frequently during the July-August timeframe. So I think August 28th is really the first opportunity that I will have, and I plan on doing everything within my power to be ready to bring in the funding recommendations at that council meeting. So basically what that would mean is anywhere from the 3 to 5 awards that staff recommends, I would take those to City Council and they will vote on the proposal, on the staff recommendation. Generally, it's done as a 2-step process. So August 28th would be my opportunity to discuss the recommendations with City Council. And then based on their input, I would bring it back at a subsequent business meeting as soon as possible for an actual vote. So that gives you a sense for the timeline that we're on. Next slide, please. For those projects that are selected and ultimately approved by council for funding, then there would be a few steps to go through in terms of completing vendor registration and submitting current certificates of insurance, and then of course working through the contract development and execution process. Just as I believe we attempted and have moved very quickly coming out of the May 26th council meeting in order to really craft and stand up and publish this funding opportunity, I will commit to doing the same as it relates to doing our evaluations on an accelerated basis, getting those recommendations in front of council. Once it's approved by council, working very aggressively with our internal partners on the procurement team, et cetera, to get contracts in place as quick as possible. These are all necessary steps in the process. There's a reason that we have to go through all of these hoops as a public sector entity. Hopefully taxpayers would appreciate that there are lots of checks and balances that are built in. So I can't bypass these checks and balances, but I can commit to you that this will continue to be a top priority for me to move this forward as quickly as I can. Next slide, please. I won't go into a lot of details here other than to me, the punchline here is in recognition of the fact that to the extent, we're focused on small, medium nonprofits here that may not have a lot of cash in reserve to, stand up a project and then wait 6 months for city funding. So what we want to do here is for those entities that are selected, once we get the contract in place, then we will work to release 30% of the award immediately, really, at the outset of the project and program, providing the award recipient with some capacity to get stuff going with the city funding itself. And then we will, through the contracting phase, based on the specific nature of the project or program, develop a payment schedule for the remaining 70% of the funds and over what time period that will be released. My bias will be for all of it to be released in a fairly accelerated format, but I wouldn't really be in a position to get more specific than that today because it's really going to hinge on the nature of the project itself. Next slide, please. Then at the end of what we would consider the grant period, depending on the project or program itself, there will be an expectation on our part that we receive a final report. It'll be important for us to be able to point to the impact of this particular grant program, how the dollars were put to work, to the extent we can identify some impact stories or success stories. And frankly, that's just the sort of thing that also puts us in a better position to try to make the case that, hey, this is just the sort of thing that we should try to find creative ways to do in the future with different funding sources. So as you would expect for grants of these size, there will be some expectations on our part that we receive information during the grant and at the completion of the programming. Next slide, please. In terms of required documentation, I'm not going to read any of this off the slide. It's explicitly identified in the notice of funding opportunity and the requirements of submitting an application. So I don't think there's anything on here that would surprise anybody, but a few things that people will have to have in order as part of their application in order for the application to be considered complete and ready for review. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to step out for a second and get a glass of water. I'll be right back, and I'm going to turn it over to Jackie to go through some of the mechanics on how to apply and one slide or two related to the federal reporting requirements. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Sean. All right, so all of the grant applications that Housing and Neighborhood Services works with are online on our online application grants portal. If you are navigating here for the first time, the easiest way to find it is to go to the website and search for Housing Support Grant, and that will bring up the web page where you received the information about today's workshop and where you received the information about the grant program itself. So at the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a black button that says Submit Application. Go ahead and click on that, and that will bring you to the grants portal. You may want to bookmark that so that you'll have it handy for the future and don't have to go through these extra steps. All right, so once you are on the portal page, you will either log in if you have logged in previously and have a username and password, or if it's your first time using the portal, you will click the button to create a new account. And then you will fill out both your contact information as the applicant and your organization's address and phone number, your tax ID number, and other contact details for your organization. If you already have, if your organization has applied before for a grant and you already have an account, but you were not the person who submitted that application, you can reach out to me if you need to get the user login details or to create a new user in the existing account. And my contact information is on the website in that gray box on the right-hand side of your screen toward the bottom of the page. So you'll see my contact information there. I'm also your support for technical support with the grant application. So if you run into any problems with the website, just shoot me an email and I will try to troubleshoot and get to the bottom of it. Also on this page, I just want, before I turn over to the next slide, I want to point out that the guidelines for the various grants are listed here. You can see the red box around the housing support grants, so you can view the grant guidelines. And I've also added the grant questions as well. So if you want to take a look at those things before you start to fill out an application or create a new account, go ahead and click on that and you can download those details. All right, so on the next slide, if you already have an account and you need to make any updates to either your organization's details or your details as the applicant, you will click on the pencil icons to make any edits. You do want to make sure that all of your contact information for both your organization and the applicant is up to date and current. And to see the open grant opportunities, you'll go to the top green menu and click on the apply button. This is going to bring up, right now there's probably 4 or 5 open grant applications. So you'll see all of them and you just want to be careful and be sure that you are applying on the correct application, because the applications are not interchangeable. So the one that you're looking for this program is the one that says nonprofit housing support grants, and you'll click on the apply button. And then of course you can take a look through the other applications to see if you qualify and want to apply for any of those as well. But for this program, you want to just click on the housing support grant link. All right, so once you have created your login and you've taken a look at the application, one of the questions that are in the application is registration for sam.gov. And you'll need to provide your unique entity ID, which is I think like a 13 or 14 digit number. And sometimes you'll receive an expiration date when you register. We've found out recently that sometimes you'll receive a confirmation back from them and it says that your entity ID does not expire. So if they give you an expiration date, add it in the application along with that ID number. And if they don't give you a registration or an expiration date, then you can just leave that blank. You are able to submit the application without the expiration date. So to get this unique identity number, you need to go to sam.gov. It's a 2-part process. So the first step, if you don't have a unique entity ID number, is to register to get that ID number. Then the second step is to register your organization. And so the second step is you'll be asked to provide information, financial information about your organization, your tax identification number, and information about your executive director's contact information. And I know these slides are small, so you might not be able to read all that, but that's the gist of it. And then you'll receive your registration. This takes a while. The second step can take more than 15 days or so. So you want to apply for your ID number and register as soon as possible, because it can take a while before this information will be finalized by the IRS, the government, sam.gov. So just do that as early as you can. All right, that's all that I have. I'll turn it back to Sean.
Thanks, Jackie. I appreciate it. So this concludes the formal part of the meeting in terms of the presentation. You can see here where to go to access everything that Jackie just made reference to, and Gail Whitcomb on my team, who introduced herself at the beginning of the call, will continue to be the point person as additional questions emerge after the discussion today. So her contact information is shown here on the slide. So with that, we can transition into questions if folks have any. Jackie, any recommendation from you on how best to facilitate the Q&A part here?
Let me just take a look in chat and see if anyone put any questions in there. They did not. So I would suggest using the hand raise feature, and then we can call on you as we see your hand raised to have an orderly discussion.
Thanks, Jackie.
So are there any questions to start? I'm not seeing any hand raised. Come off mute and shout out a question as well.
Old-fashioned way.
Can't believe there's no questions.
Well, Jackie, this is Nemish. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Namaste to everybody. Gail, nice seeing you after a long time. The thing is that we refugee immigrants and minorities are in process of working with Habitat Humanity and some landowners within the area of Albemarle and Central, trying to see if we can put some small housing for seniors. And we don't know how to apply because this is not what we do every day. But we do work with people's issues and try to handle it the way we can. We have a center, crisis center, where many of your city councils have visited. We would like some kind of help, and you responded to my email to see Dr. Chan from CACC. Sometimes people who are writing grants are not familiar with real issues on the ground. So if there is a way to meet someone and understand that this is what I have and how should I put it into your list and be eligible or not eligible, it's fine. But we don't do this every day, and most of the grant writers are asking for money. I'm very open and straightforward to say things. So forgive me if there's something that you don't see that it should be said, but I don't mean to say anything wrong. I mean to say that we don't have enough money to hire somebody to do it, but we are in process, and we see that many seniors from refugee immigrants and minorities are left behind by their children, and they come to our crisis center. They will not go to homeless, but because they don't come from the culture that allows them to sustain there. So is there a way or partnership that we can do and learn how to finish this process?
Let me start, and then I'd like to invite Warren or anyone else to weigh in a little bit. I think, one of the things we really attempted to do with the questions that were built into the request for proposal, which in many instances mirror those specific funding prioritization attributes that I identified, is to be very transparent in terms of what we're interested in, the types of attributes that are most compelling to us. And then, not expecting that nonprofit organizations, especially the small and medium-sized ones, are going to have, full-time professional grant writers on staff. We know that's not the case, but just looking to each of you based on the hopefully fairly explicit questions that we've posed to provide your best response, to breathe life into your project opportunity in a way that demonstrates to what extent you are putting forward a proposal that kind of meets or beats those thresholds that we've established. I'll stop there, see if Warren's got any other suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a common issue that we have a lot of great partners who are working in the community who recognize that there is a housing component or a housing issue with the specific population that you're serving, but you're not, necessarily a housing organization or a housing developer per se. So I think that partnerships is a great first step, is bringing a partner to the table to do the development component for you, maybe to help with the grant writing component. I could also see, maybe submitting for, and this is kind of going back to Sean, I'm not sure which of these opportunities or if either would be appropriate, but almost a pre-development ask. And maybe it's the other grant opportunity that Sean mentioned earlier, around doing some pre-development work, which would be grant writing, but also be doing some financial feasibility about looking at the land that you have, looking at what it's zoned for and what can be constructed there, getting some detailed cost estimates, some things that you could hire someone to do, but like you said, without some grant funding for that, you wouldn't be able to do on your own. And I think that what Sean was also alluding to is that, this application process that Sean and the team has developed for this particular opportunity is meant to be user friendly. So there's lots of things that are not being asked for in this grant opportunity that you would see in one of like our housing development, where the list of attachments is 27 items long, and we're asking for all sorts of technical detail. That's not what's being requested in this ask. It's been specifically designed for organizations that do not have those levels of capacity to be able to still participate in this offering. So, Sean, hopefully I didn't go astray there.
That's helpful, Warren. Thanks. And Nimish, I would say, feel free to connect with Gail after the call if there are any specific follow-ups that you've got, and we can handle it from there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One more question about the employee. As you know, we don't have enough funding, so that one employee who is there is not fully employed like salary, but maybe taking a stipend for gas money and time and still working because the organization cannot afford it. So is there a way, because most of our funding goes towards the work we do, and we would like to understand if we are still eligible to apply or not.
Yeah, I've had a couple questions come in along those lines, and I want to be really consistent on all of these and always gravitate towards, if the requirement says X, then we're just going to have to stick with X. So for this one, I would say to be eligible, the entity needs to have one full-time employee. And part of that goes back to, we are going to award a few grants. They will be fairly sizable because there'll be a few number. So we need to be sure that we're comfortable that it's a partner that can step into that kind of funding and be ready to deploy it. And that's one among a number of ways that we're doing that. Partly we're establishing the baseline operating budget. We're establishing the requirement that there be an operating board of directors, and we're also establishing the requirement that there be one truly full-time staff person that's employed by the nonprofit organization.
Thank you.
Sure. I'll take the next one here in the chat, and then maybe Warren, you can take the one after it. Yes, 501c3 can apply if you are either 2 to 10 years old, or you have an operating budget greater than 250,000, but with annual revenue no more than 7.5 million. So as long as you fall into one or both of those two categories, you would be eligible.
So the next question is, would funding for rental assistance or subsidies be an appropriate use? The people who don't have vouchers, sorry, I can't read the whole question here, might need some assistance to bridge an affordability gap for a period of time to be housed. I'm not intimately familiar with exactly the wording in this RFP. I think that unless it's specifically excluded in the list of activities, you probably could request this under this RFP. I will also let you know that there is a tenant-based rental assistance RFP that's specifically coming out. It will be out within the next month. That you could also apply for that type of activity under that program as well. So Sean, unless you specifically excluded rental assistance or rental subsidies from this grant, I would say it would be an eligible activity.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. See, next question here on multiple projects. Yes, if there are multiple projects from one entity, then that would be perfectly fine. My preference would be just to submit it as a single kind of bundled request with different ornaments on the tree underneath of it. You know, in aggregate, if there are multiple requests, the $2.5 million cap for an award would still apply, whether that be for one underlying project or two or three. But that's just a long-winded way of saying, yes, multiple projects are fine from one entity. Our preference would be that you submit it as a single application. On the next one, is there any sort of expiration date on funds? I would say I'm going to give a fairly conservative answer. And if Kathleen, if you have a question that kind of takes this to the next level, ping Gail separately, and then you and I can chat as needed. So with the American Rescue Plan, the city of Charlotte is considered the funding recipient. And we have a requirement with American Rescue Plan funds that we obligate all of the funds by the end of calendar year 2024, and that we expend all of the funds by end of calendar year 2026. So obviously with this program, there's no issue with us. We will obligate the funds well before the end of 24, and we will expend the funds well before the end of 26. But then there's a question of to what extent do any of those deadlines extend into subrecipients like this? So that was a long-winded way of saying, my sense is that as long as all of the funds are expended by the recipient nonprofit by the end of calendar year 2026, I know with absolute assurance that we're fine. If any of you have scenarios where you think that you would have programmatic needs where the receipt of the funds would actually be expended beyond the end of 2026, that'd be something I would encourage you to ping Gail on, and then she'll gather those questions, and then I can work with her and the rest of the team to provide a more definitive response to that. I'm looking down to the last question. I'll start and then I'll ask Warren to weigh in as well. So, I mean, sports revenue connection training. So in terms of the eligibility of an applicant, so only nonprofit organizations can pursue the grant. Warren, why don't you read that and see if you have a different view?
So the question is, how does a for-profit housing support services partner apply for this opportunity? And the answer is that they couldn't directly apply for this opportunity because you have to be a nonprofit. But, I would say, probably all of our nonprofits that we partner with that provide any type of supportive services do at least some type of subcontracting to a for-profit contractor or service provider. So for instance, the shelter brings in medical personnel to provide medical services. They bring in mental health professionals to provide mental health services. So that is how you would access this if you are a for-profit that provides various types of supportive services for housing-related stability outreach efforts, is that you just partner with someone that's doing that work and is applying for this grant, and you could come in as a contractor providing services.
Moving on to the next one. Is there any anticipation of awarding the award ceiling to any one organization? I would say, and I'm glad we're recording this, so we'll have this for posterity, right? Yes, there is an anticipation. I think that's why we established an award ceiling in order to signal to the marketplace that we have an appetite to fund a project or program up to that amount. That's about as far as I can go, because beyond that, it really depends on how compelling the requests are. And I have a sense we're going to receive some really compelling requests. But for any organization on this call that believes they can package something together that adds up to $2.5 million, either one single project, or to Mr. Robinson's earlier question, could it be a package of projects? then I would encourage you to do that. And then ultimately it falls upon us as the review team to go through that evaluation and make the selections based on who puts the most compelling opportunities forward. And some of those may get fully funded, some may get partially funded, some may not get any funding at all. So that's probably about as far as I can go today, given that I haven't looked through any applications yet. I know I run the risk of over talking on this one, but just to go back to the beginning, the desire here is to have a relatively few number of awards to a small number of recipient organizations, because we are making a philosophical choice to try to partner with a few organizations in really big ways, rather than spread this across dozens and dozens of nonprofits. Okay, with the additional question, I'd invite anyone on the team that has a perspective on that one to weigh in.
I'm wondering, Shakira, if you could elaborate a little on your question. Is there a list of partner organizations you could reach out to just to help us better respond to you? And feel free to come off mute if that helps.
Oh, okay. Thank you for accepting the question. Yes, I was wondering if there were organizations that Mr. Warren Wooten had mentioned that would be interested in having sub opportunities for support services to the residents that I could have a list of to reach out to them to see if that might be a partnering opportunity.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of different ways that we could do that. One, I would suggest that you could just go ahead and put your information into the chat here so that all of the partners that are currently on the line can get your information and can reach out to you about the services that you provide. And we can also get you a list of organizations that are members of the continuum of care. And I would imagine that many of the people that are on this call and almost all of the people that are working in the homeless space or the supportive housing space are members of the continuum of care. And then you could reach out to them directly about the services that you provide.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, there wasn't a particular percentage of the budget that we are to request. So does that mean we can request any amount up to 2.5 million for any budget amount? I think that's a good observation. In the separate program, which we've made reference to, the Community Resiliency Fund, there was a requirement that the request couldn't exceed a certain percentage of the operating budget. We did not include, I don't think we included that in this program. And maybe that was an oversight on my part, but it's not in there. So that means you are able to request up to the full amount. I think it is fair to say that it's something that we will, there's a reason that we're asking for some of the financial information. So if someone is going to put in a request at the full amount and it far dwarfs their current organizational size. So if someone, let me just make up the most extreme example. If someone has an operating budget of $251,000 each of the last 5 years, and they make a request for $2.5 million, I would strongly encourage you to include something in your proposal that demonstrates why you believe you have the capacity to deliver on a grant opportunity that size, given how large it would be relative to your kind of current operations. Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. May
John, I'm
doable.
just popping in the link to the Community Resilience Fund
Oh,
grant
thanks.
because
Yeah.
I feel like some people might be interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. If you've listened in today and you weren't aware of that, I encourage you to take a look at it. Or if you've listened in today and you feel like, oh gosh, maybe I'm not eligible for this housing support grant opportunity, or it doesn't seem like a good fit, then I'm glad that these two things happen to be going on in parallel. Just keep in mind for the link that Jackie just provided, the deadline for that one is June 30th. So that's coming up pretty quick. Okay, maybe going once, going twice here. Going 3 times. Great. Okay, good. Hey, thanks everybody for the time today. I'm enthusiastic about the opportunity. I look forward to seeing some great applications and we'll take it from there. Have a good day, everybody. Bye now.